In the words of Valerie Cherish, hello, hello, hello. This is made possible by Pop Culture, the podcast, season 2. I'm Danielle Turchiano, and this is the podcast where I invite guests to come on and share the stories from pop culture's past and present that have greatly shaped them. We just wrapped up season 2 of Tell Me Lies on Hulu, and today's guest is actor Alicia Crowder, who plays Diana on that show. You might also know her from The Society or Bleecker. And I want to say this up front. Because season 2 is available in full already, it is not a spoiler for what we're about to talk about. If you haven't seen it yet, if you don't know how it ends, maybe go watch that first. Otherwise, yeah, you're going to be a little confused and maybe even mad about the things that we talk about because you're going to want to see them before you hear us talk about them. Anyway, Alicia's not just on to talk about Tell Me Lies. Of course, she's here to buy into the concept of the podcast. So we look at her past influences, which aren't too far in the past, to be honest. We've got Amy Winehouse, we've got Pearl, music, movies, TV. It's a little bit of everything on this episode. Enjoy. All right. Well, thank you for being on the podcast first and foremost, because as everybody knows who listens to this all the time, like TV is my medium of choice. And we just obviously ended a pretty big season for you. But I mean, before we get too deep into Tell Me Lies, I always like to start these conversations with the past influence because I feel like it says a lot. It sets up a lot about like the artist you are, the person you are. And I always ask my guests to kind of set that up for everyone so that it comes from you directly. Everyone can understand like why you love what you love rather than me trying to bungle an intro. So
Right.
So maybe just set this up a little bit of you know, when we were talking about this podcast and I said, hey, pop culture influence from the past, what came to mind first and why?
So yeah, a lot of different things, like a lot of different movies, and but also a lot of music. And I was really thinking, okay, and it's funny because it is something from the past, but it's still something like an artist that I listen to all the time. And who's also like still, I feel like a really big part of my life. And that's Amy Winehouse. Um, Yeah, she it was, I think I first saw her like Back to Black music video in like 2005 or something like on TV. And I just fell in love with her. I fell in love with her like as a person and also as an artist. I thought that she was so her voice like being so incredibly unique and really like writing all of her own stuff, like doing all of her like a true musician. And it's interesting that she got kind of absorbed into this pop genre, but truly pop meaning popular because she was like so well loved, and really admired and appreciated, I think, for her talent. And then, of course, all of the tragedy that followed. Um, I think I don't know, just like the fact that she struggled so much and it was such a public struggle, um, really made me feel for her in a different way. Um, and like the documentary that came out about her life, I think was also like so eye-opening because like people knew her story and like what she was going through, but that like really made me see it in a different way.
Hmm.
And I just think her lyrics and her voice and the music is just like truly, truly one of a kind. And it's always like been something that I loved so much.
So I want to like dissect all of this because one of the things I loved when you said Amy Winehouse in general was when I heard that, I immediately assumed and maybe misassumed that a lot of what you loved was like, oh, maybe her music helps you get into character. So
Mm,
you've already talked about like the art and the artist as both inspiration. So I do want to kind of dive into the music side first. Is that
hmm
true? I mean, were there pieces of her albums that you feel like, oh, I use this particular song or this particular song arc as, inspiration for one character or another?
I wouldn't say specifically that because I don't think that that's necessarily how I
Mm.
approach like getting into a character, but I think that like kind of living vicarious, like when you listen to a song and it makes you feel a certain way. I think that that's I think how I approach acting, and I think that that's the goal, that someone is, watching your TV show and it is impactful in the same way that when you listen to a song that makes you cry or, gives you goosebumps. Like it's that I think it's in that same vein of like performance art and like I think for me the art that I love the most and that I really want to make is the ones that are very emotionally impactful.
Mhm. I think that makes sense. I think that also speaks a lot to what we're currently seeing on Tell Me Lies in terms of
Mhm.
like the arc of where she's gone relationship wise, and maybe a little bit also as a, I like to say, master manipulator by the end of season two. Like we learned some things.
Mhm.
Um, but take me back. Sorry, I don't want to jump ahead to Tell Me Lies too quickly, but take me
Mhm.
back to, and you said you first saw that music video. What was it that drew you in? What was it that made you say, this song, this artist, this video itself, now I need to find out more? And what is your process when you are a fan of like finding out more? How much of it is you devour all the actual music versus like you're already before the documentary seeking out who is this person who made this music?
I think the reason why I was so drawn to her, when I saw the music video is she wasn't blonde and like glitzy and like in pink. Like it was a really like very kind of grungy, like a jazz grunge, and I just thought that that was so interesting and like the aesthetic I think that I am drawn to more rather than your like typical like pop girl. And I just found it really interesting, and that she didn't seem it was so raw, I
Mm,
think. And this I was not even 10 years old yet at this point, but it was still something that, like, really struck me, and how I don't know, it's interesting, like, even though she's not and, like, she wasn't an actress, like, in her music video, you could really feel, like, the story that she was telling and, like, how emotionally connected she was to it, to the lyrics. And yeah, I just thought it was something different. It was something that I'd never seen before. And obviously like blown away by her voice.
mhm.
Um, so yeah, and then as far as like me going about, I mean, again, this is 2005. So
Sure.
like,
Yeah, I would say it is
yeah,
a little
and
bit
I
different.
was a kid, so I didn't really have, I mean, like the way that you like Google someone or like go on someone's social media, like that was not really as so much of a thing for me. But I just listened to her CD on repeat, you
Okay.
know, and I know I was listening to it before we got on just to kind of like get into it. And I
Nice.
know every single word to every single song by heart. Um Even if I go a year without listening to it, like it's something that just like comes back to
Mhm.
me. Um so yeah, just like really like deeply, deeply immersed myself in it.
I mean, I think also it speaks to like the age you were when you
Mhm.
were listening to it for the first time. Like that's, you are a sponge. That is a very formative time.
Right.
So like I think about the things I was listening to when I was like 9 or 10. I'm like, yeah, I can still remember all those words now too. I maybe shouldn't because they're not great, but
Right.
you at least chose
Right.
something that is worthwhile.
Right.
But that also leads me to, I mean, to me, listen, if I can't imagine how I would have connected to it if I listened to it when I was that young, because I'm
Mhm.
older than you, but I am curious if you like how much you were really dissecting lyrics at that age.
Mhm.
Because like I listened to Rehab as an adult, and
Mhm.
I'm like, I think it's a great song, but I think the way that we as a society pumped it up and we're not really listening to her, what she's saying. Like she has
Oh
a
yeah.
problem, she's not really ready, and we're not really like understanding that. But I'm
Mhm.
assuming, and maybe again misassuming, like, is that something you're even thinking about, or are you just enjoying it for what it is?
I think that Rehab is like, obviously I think it was one of her most popular songs. I don't know if it was the song that like I identified with the most,
Okay.
but I think that like you know, it's really interesting. Like she has a line in there, but my daddy thinks I'm fine. And it made me think about, you know, my own relationship with like my father and what does that mean? Like
Mm.
if there is a big problem, but then your parent, you know, is the one who is sabotaging you. And like, what does that mean? And like, why would they do that? You know? But outside of Rehab, I think just like in general, a lot of her songs are about relationships with men.
Yeah.
And I think that as like a 10, 11, 12-year-old, I was just beginning to be curious about like, what is a romantic relationship like? And what, you know, how does that make you feel? And like, what can happen? And what like goes on between, you know, adults that are in a relationship like that? And again, I think that's the age when you really start to become like curious about those things. Um, so yeah, that was really, really interesting.
Do you feel like there was one song that was the best example for you for what it could be, and one that was maybe the most cautionary tale?
Oh man. Yeah, I think Tears Dry on Their Own,
Mm.
um, is the one that is, like, really about like, really explicitly about that, and then Back to Black, I think, is the most, like, cautionary one for sure, um, and yeah, like, I'm getting chills just thinking about it, like, it's just, like, so poignant, for me, um, so, yeah.
Now that you're older, when you listen to them, how do you reflect back on like what maybe you went through listening to them the first time, or like what they taught you? Do you have a different feeling that they evoke when you listen to them now based on like how far you—
Oh! Yeah, it's really interesting. I think that they're like really beautifully timeless just as music. Um, but I think that like, you know, I relate a lot more and like just understand a lot more, you know, and also about like after because like obviously as a child I hadn't like had any like experience with like alcohol or like what
Right.
drinking is and like that's is so much and like after being an adult like, like, really seeing, like, oh, like, that's, like, really what she was talking about, um, and, yeah, I think this just, like, identifying with her a lot more, just, like, you know, everyone goes through breakups, everyone goes through, like, hard times and, you know, difficulties in relationships, so definitely, and it's, like, oh, it's I think, like, as a child, when you're listening to things that you don't understand, it's a very mysterious, you
Mm.
know? And I think that like, that kind of mystery has gone away, but in, like, the most beautiful way, you know? Like, it doesn't make it any less interesting, it's just less confusing, I think, you
Yeah.
know? Like
Yeah, I mean, because you can also start saying like, okay, I hear this one lyric that when I was a kid made me wonder what something would be, and now
Right.
you had an experience, you know what it was for you, and
Mhm.
it kind of reshapes, I think, not maybe not an understanding, but it reshapes kind of a feeling around it and kind of a deepening of the understanding. But you use the word mystery, which I really liked, because you
Mhm.
pointed out right from the jump that like you watched the documentary, like you learned about her,
Mhm.
which I think also takes away a lot of that mystery and like gives you the answers right off the bat. So I want to talk about the documentary versus the, I'm gonna call it fictional movie, but like it's a dramatization, but like it felt like it took a lot of liberties, and I'm the one that's editorializing that. If you disagree, that's fine.
Right. I actually
Um,
didn't ever see
okay.
that movie.
I was going to ask because I feel like when you love an artist, there is sometimes a I want to love the version of the artist that I hold, and sometimes that is not the truth necessarily.
Yeah, I
So
think
then you
that's why
don't
I
want the
didn't
other
see
versions.
it. Yeah, I think that's why I didn't see it. It's silly, but I'm like, it's too soon, you know?
Mm,
But it really just for me, and like it's such an interesting like parasocial, you know, dynamic, but it just felt too soon for me. Even though it has been like over 10 years, you know, since she's passed. But it felt too soon and it felt like I don't know, I just wasn't really interested in like seeing it. And I think that, like, I think the people who made it and worked on it, like, I can't imagine, like, that task as an actress of, like, having
Mm.
to attempt to embody someone who had such a huge personality, so iconic, so well known. I think that that's, like, a huge task in itself. Um, and yeah, I can't imagine the pressure, and, I heard that her performance was amazing. Um, but yeah, I just wasn't super interested in seeing it.
Yeah, no,
I
that's
just
fair.
yeah, yeah, not yet, not yet. I probably will at some point. Um,
But when
but
did you watch the documentary? Because to me, I was gonna say I thought that would have felt too soon because that was like 3 or 4 years after she passed.
yeah, so I watched it, I think just a couple years after it came out, just because I was so curious, and, like, she's one of my favorite artists, and I really wanted to see, like, what was going on, you
Mm.
know? And yeah, it was really dark. I think I watched it in theaters, and then I watched it again, like, on some streaming thing. Um, but yeah, incredibly dark. But I think also it's so funny, and, like, no pun intended, incredibly dark, but also very illuminating at the same time.
Oh
Like, I
yeah.
think it really, because people made fun of her. Like, there were SNL skits,
Right.
like, making fun of her for, like, coming on stage and being drunk out of her mind, or, being high or whatever. And it really, you know, like, gave us a look into, like, how she got there. Because, it doesn't, like, someone doesn't become an addict overnight.
Right.
It's a process.
Well, but that's the other
Um,
thing. I think also like what I was trying to get to before when I was talking about how we as a society like viewed rehab, like there wasn't an empathy around addiction and there wasn't an understanding that like it's a disease.
mhm,
And that, maybe we shouldn't celebrate parts of it because we need to make sure that the person is getting help for the parts that they need help for. And I've been
right.
talking a lot about this with other guests on the podcast just because I feel like the characters you guys play, if some of these characters, if they existed years ago, I don't think would get the empathy that we give them as an audience today.
Mhm.
But I don't know if this is something you've really thought about just in terms of like watching these things when you were so young and understanding that from when you were so young, if you feel like that has made you less judgmental as a person towards a
Mm.
character or towards a person or towards anything, if you feel like that's something you internalized from your love of, in this case, Amy.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've never thought about that. And, like, we all would like to think of ourselves as very understanding and, like, not
You say
judgmental,
that, but I
but
don't. Like I'm fully aware I'm a judgmental, but this is also
right.
why I like to talk about it with you guys because like, I'm very judgmental, and I
Yeah.
feel like there are even characters that I watch today that I'm like, I know what they're going for with the writing
Mhm.
and the performance, and they want me to be sympathetic, but I'm just
Right.
not.
Yeah.
So we'll
And
get
I
there.
think that yeah, and I think that that's really true too, and I think a lot of characters are extremely judgmental and, like, unsympathetic, um, which, I think is, like, a very realistic reflection of, like, who we are as people. But yeah, I think probably. I'm not sure if I can definitely, like, say yes or no, about, like, if, like, sympathizing and, like, loving Amy as an artist, like, made me more sympathetic to people going through that struggle. But probably somewhere deep in there, probably, yeah.
Or just in general, because I will say, like, looking at the characters on Tell Me Lies, like when you look at your scripts season over
Mhm,
season, week over week, how are you viewing them? Like not just Diana,
mhm,
but like
mhm.
how much are you judging them versus how much
Yeah,
are you saying, well, I'm on this journey with them and
mhm.
like they're young and they have to learn their lessons.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think especially for all of the female characters, and especially in this season, like people, like, when Lucy says, like, "Oh, no, like, I know that Chris, like, is assaulting people because it happened to me,"
Mhm.
and really, like, hijacking Pippa's, like, trauma and experience, and kind of, like, the most like shocking way. But I understood that. And I also understand like the more general, both Diana and Lucy, like being like, and I see so many comments like, leave him, like it's so obvious, like he's a red flag, but when you love someone, and I think that Stephen like in himself is like a deeply charismatic, and which like and also that bleeds also into like how manipulative he is also. But I think that these two women like truly love him,
Mhm.
like truly love him, um and that ends up being like their downfall in a lot of ways. And I think that, and so like seeing a character and thinking like, oh, that's so stupid, like like I would never do that, but if you think about like when you've really very deeply been in love with someone, that it can make you do crazy things.
It's really interesting to hear you point out that specific example for Lucy, because like I'll be honest, that was one where I was less judgmental about her, because in
Mm,
a way I saw it like Pippa wasn't coming forward publicly in that moment.
mm,
I don't think she should have. I don't think she was ready
mm,
to, but it felt more like Lucy saying like, "Hey, like stop
mm.
ganging up on women. Like we're not the problem here. This guy is the problem here."
Right.
But there have been so many other instances throughout the two seasons, and I would even maybe a little less for Lucy than certainly Steven. I play a game called On a Scale of 0 to Steven, How Sociopathic Are You? Because like you called him charming and charismatic, and I'm like, sure, I think that's Jackson as an actor, like infusing him, but like on paper, like,
Oh
and he
yeah.
admitted it. He admitted he was like, I think I'm a bad person finally. So
Mm.
getting to where you get to with Diana at the end of season two, you were just talking about like when you're in love. Do you feel like she really was in love with him? How much do you feel like at certain points, especially in season two, she was learning things about herself and maybe was no longer in love with him, but was needing him as a means to an end?
Oh, I think she is in love with him the whole time. I think that like the introduction of her relationship with Pippa, and then like very late into the season some other like confusing feelings come up. I don't think that like at this point like in the college years of season 2 that Diana is like in touch with or aware of like her sexuality in like
Mhm.
any kind of way. I think that it's just like very like weird and confusing, and that we have like
Right.
um, that
But I
moment.
mean, even in that, like even in the like, I'm not really sure,
Mm,
staying with him can sometimes be like a good buffer of like, I don't have to
right,
think about my feelings right now. I'm in this
right,
relationship. It presents a certain way. And maybe
mm,
like maybe I'm getting something out of this that I don't even
right,
realize I need.
right, exactly. And I think so. Back to your original question, like, is Diana in love with him? Yes,
Okay.
deeply. And even
Why?
I think because, um, and I had to,
I'm sorry.
because
I
like,
mean, like, I'm sure there are real reasons. I just think he's so terrible. And I'm like, all of these
yeah,
women deserve so much better.
yeah, of course. And so as an actor, that's my challenge. I really
Yeah.
had to sit down like by myself before we started shooting, and I was like, why is this beautiful smart woman with him? And what I figured out is that like I think Diana values intelligence so much, and I think that Steven is the smartest person she's ever met, period. Like and I think he's incredibly smart, which she like values so highly. I think that he's like deeply funny to her, and someone who can really match her like where she's at. And I don't think she's ever met anyone like that. And also the fact that he comes from like a different socioeconomic sphere than she does. I think that she respects that so much because like she had private tutors, went to a private school her whole life, and I think that, naturally she is smart, but she had a lot of help, and Steven had nothing.
Right.
And look at like where he's brought himself. And I think that like she really respects and admires that so much. And I think that it's like, she's like, I'm not sure if she could have done that, you
Mm.
know? I think that she thinks it takes a very special kind of person who, against all odds, is like still at the top of his game. So yeah,
That's
that's the
fair.
yeah,
I,
that's the mental gymnastics that I did for her.
well, I mean, I think that's also what makes this a really interesting show, just in the point, in the sense of like, and I won't speak for everybody, but I am typically the person that sides with, maybe sounds weird, but sides with the characters that have really pulled themselves up and like don't
Mhm,
come from the privilege and have proven themselves. But at the
mhm,
same time, he makes it so hard for me to root for him that
mhm.
it's a really interesting test, I think, of like, well, what am I valuing in this moment? Like
Right.
even that scene at dinner where like she's clearly lying. We learn later where like her credit card is not declined and he has to pay. I like started to like, yeah, make him pay. And then I was like, oh, but that's kind of sad. Like he has no money. And like in my head, I was like, I think she's lying. So it's sad
Right.
that she's lying. But
Mhm.
I don't know. I mean, and then that I also speaks to, I think, like I said earlier, like I judge everybody hard.
Right.
In those moments, in those relationship moments when you're acting them with Jackson, you know, or maybe you don't know actually. Let me ask you that. At that point in the season, did you know what was really happening and how she was effectively manipulating him to get him to end the relationship?
Yeah, so this season was very unique because we had such a long time off because of the strikes. The
Hmm.
writers had written the whole season by the time we went. So, on day one of shooting, we knew the whole plot line. So that was actually really cool and something that like I haven't experienced before on a TV show. So yeah, I knew, which was really helpful. And then like constructing that,
Exactly.
arc and really figuring out, okay, when does she decide and what's going on. So yeah, Alicia, the actor, knew at that point that it was an elaborate ruse. And I also thought that it's so funny. I'm brought back to like us sitting in that like dim little cafe again and like and I think Jackson and I had a moment between scenes and he's like, wow, like this is so shitty. And I'm like, it's shitty that my boyfriend is buying me dinner for once, like I was very much like, and I know that he doesn't have any money, but like it's one dinner, like so yeah.
It's one dinner, but it's also like it's just indicative of like treat her well. It doesn't
Right.
always have to be monetary. Like you don't have
Right.
to be the one paying, but you're
Mhm.
not treating her well throughout.
Mhm.
I don't know how
Mhm.
much
Right.
she knows and doesn't know of what we see, obviously, as an audience, but
Mhm.
and that I guess that is also part of the question though. And when I was asking in terms of like working with Jackson, in that situation, she's manipulating him, but there are things that he does all the way throughout to manipulate her. Do you have those kinds of conversations around, you know, how to get the upper hand on each other, or is that just something that you're doing in a performance and trying to surprise the other one with?
We had the conversation before that's like, okay, what's been happening off screen? Like really just getting like very technical with like
Mm.
what are the events that have led us to this place. And so that's really helpful because it's such a there's so especially with an ensemble show, there's so much happening and there's also so much happening off
Yes.
screen that you don't it's like okay wait that wasn't a scene that we did but like this happened like it had to have happened in order for us to be like in this moment right now so we really like have those discussions when we need like some scenes are simple it's like oh we're coming back from breakfast or like whatever but in those more like when there's so much happening underneath the surface like it's we really just sit down and just like get very technical and like create like a frame for ourselves, which is really helpful.
Can you share some of what you created for what was happening for Diana off screen? Because there is, I mean, there's so much time where like she's not with us, but we
Mhm.
know that she's doing cool stuff because she's
Right.
a cool character. How much of that did you have to build in terms of like, I imagined her X, Y, and Z?
Right. So I think that like there's like a time jump between when she sees the pictures of Macy on his computer and then to when they get their LSAT scores.
Right.
And so I think we looked it up and I think it's about like 2 to 3, 4 weeks
Oh,
between
right.
like
Until
when
you get
you
your
take the
scores. Yeah.
test Yeah, from when you take the test to when you get your scores. And I think that and that was because besides that, the rest of the show is like very like real time, but that's really the only big like time jump. At least for me, I think that I might not that might not be true.
Oh, I mean,
Anyways,
well, with the
so
exception, obviously, of the wedding, but
right. Yeah. But yeah, as far as like the 2008 timeline, so I think that so for me, I was just like, okay. I don't think that when she saw the pictures of Macy, she wasn't immediately like, okay, I'm gonna lie about my LSAT score and like make him break up with me. I think that it took her those weeks to figure that out. I think that like I saw the pictures and immediately I was like, I have to get like I have to get out of this situation. But also knowing that and it's really interesting, and I think this is still I'm not sure if they cut this from the show, but originally in the script, I'm having a conversation on the phone with my mom, and she's complaining about my dad, and I'm like, "Mom, just leave him." And she says, "Your father is not the kind of person that lets people leave him."
mm,
And I think that Diana realizes that Steven is not the kind of person that lets people leave him, which is why I don't just come to him and I'm like, we're
right.
done, which is why I,
I'm
go
glad.
through the charade.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out because one of my questions at the end of the season was after we saw the way that it ended, and then after we saw the reveal of like, okay, she orchestrated this, it kept coming back in my head of when they're talking and he's saying to her, like, what if I'm actually as bad as everyone says? What if I'm actually a bad person? And she effectively says, you're not. And he says, well, what if you're wrong? And it's like I in my head was like I felt like if I were in Diana's shoes, I'd be like raging inside, being like, you, I am wrong, you are, I'm lying to you, you're a bad person.
Mm-hmm.
Did you guys play with that at all on set in terms of like how much she could let herself rail at him? Because like you just said, like he has to think he's in control. She says
Mm-hmm.
that's bad on screen, but like, oh man, that had to be, I feel like that had to be hard to rein that in.
Yeah, so we tried it. That's really interesting. We tried it a lot of different ways because we tried it like her like how much can he tell that like she's just straight up lying to him? Like how
Sure.
convincing does she need to be in that moment?
Mm,
And we played it a lot of different ways. And I think that you know Diane also knew that like that was the nail in the coffin, that that was him like that in that moment. I think that there was a chance for us to possibly save our relationship, and I think that that was his, like, bizarre olive branch and, like, see
hmm
me for who I am, like, really, like, take me as I like, "Can you handle this?" And her being like, "Nope, you're fine. Nothing's wrong. You're a good person," you know? Um, and I haven't watched that, like, since we
Okay.
did it, so I'm interested to see, like, how it comes off,
Yeah. No, it's
Um,
it's great. And I think it's also it's a subtle like I don't know how many people will assume she's lying.
right,
I don't think really anybody will assume she's doing this or lying
right.
way. I come at the show from the point of view of like everybody really should teach him a lesson. And so like I think I was hoping for things like that. And so then when it was
Mhm.
finally revealed, I was like, oh good. Like I don't know if
Yeah.
I want to say I was right, but like I was right
Mhm.
not because I thought that's what she was doing, but I was right in that that's what needed to happen. Like I was
Yeah.
very mad when I first thought, oh, she just let him break up with her. She's so much better than him. She should be yelling.
Right.
Why is she not yelling at him? And then of course
Mhm.
they explain that.
Right, yeah.
Um, I don't
And
know.
I
I
think
mean,
that
again,
yeah.
that may be how I view it. Other people who are like shipping the characters may just be like,
Right.
how dare this fall apart? I
Right.
also will say I was in the middle of a rewatch of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend when I watched season 2 of Tell Me
Mhm.
Lies, and I had
Mhm.
just paused it. I don't know if you ever watched it, but I had just paused it
Mhm.
when there's a song called I'm a Good Person that Rachel Bloom
Mhm.
sings, and it's basically like she's trying to convince everyone and herself that she's a good person and her examples are not great. And I had it in my head like for a lot of season 2, and it just
Mhm.
worked very well, I thought.
Yeah. Yeah.
Randomly. But I do want to jump to talking about their relationship with Pippa though, because like we don't really see a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
It is kind of played for a surprise, which I was it a surprise to you? Like, I mean, what I would love to talk about a little bit is like how you developed that in your mind as well.
That was also a lot of, you know, stuff that happens off screen that, that Sonia and I had to figure out, like, okay, what happens in these years? Like when does this happen? Because we don't really see that, season 3,
Sure,
knock
yeah.
on wood, that we'll get to explore that a little bit more. But I think that the relationship with Pippa, it starts as like her feeling a very, very deep instinctual need to take care of her and to protect her. And I think that that stems from probably a romantic place, but I don't think that Diana is aware of that
Mm,
any in any sense. Like not in touch with that at all. I think, Pippa is obviously more aware of her sexuality than Diana is at that point. But no, I think that there's no manipulation at all. I think that the relationship with Pippa is like fully genuine. And I think it's confusing for Diana because she's like,
mm,
why do I care about this girl so much? Like, why do I need her to be okay? And then, we eventually find
right.
out like, oh, it's because, they end up falling in love. Um,
Well, I was honestly thinking more in the future of like when
mm,
that far down the road in a relationship,
mm,
are they still as happy as they appear at the end of the season, or do you think like there
mm.
could be something under the surface that we don't know about yet?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think that like you see on screen that like Pippa really wants Diana to come and like be a part of this
Right.
wedding thing. And Diana's like, no, like, and I think that Pippa thinks it's because Diana doesn't want to like be seen in public with her. Like that was also something we played with and talked about. Like, is Diana out
Mm,
to like even to like her family and friends? Um, but I don't think that like I think that like Diana doesn't give two shits if like these people from college know if she's gay or not. Like I think that she's just like those people are so fucking toxic. Like I don't want to be anywhere
right.
near them. Um
I
so
think
and
that
like
I
there's
was
only
I think that's the healthiest thing anybody could do, but then she still was there at the end. Like Pippa
right.
convinced her or she convinced
Mm,
herself. So
right. Yeah, and then we have that little moment. I haven't I need to go back
mm,
and like rewatch because they send us, the clips or whatever. But there's also a moment, I don't know if they kept this in where like Lucy's boyfriend is like, "Oh, how long have you guys been dating?" And then I say or one of us says like, "Oh, it depends on who you ask."
mm,
So I think that
that's
there's like
interesting.
that, yeah, and I think that there's like that element too of like how serious are we? How long have we been together? Like
Right.
how,
And
like
also to
what?
speak to what you said earlier about like maybe she didn't come out to everybody right away or at the
Right.
same time as each other. And so like
Mm,
that's an interesting little like nugget for the future when we unpeel the layers, I guess.
right.
Right.
Exactly.
Assuming we
Yeah.
get the future.
Right.
So, I mean, this show to me, I use this word as intense. I use that word a lot for a lot of shows, but I use it as emotionally intense because I feel like for me as somebody who graduated, I can't believe I'm about to say this, from college 20 years ago next year, it like sucks you back to a time. And again, maybe this also is because of the time period the show takes place in. Like I graduated from college in 2005, so the show is very
Mm,
close to like when he gets his first iPhone, I was like, "Oh my God." Like
yeah.
just giant flashbacks. So
Mhm.
I feel like it's very emotionally intense because of that. Like it sucks you back to like the mistakes you make when you're young.
Mm,
Um, when you are immersing yourself in this world for work every day, this is something I love to ask in terms of like your current or your present influences. How much of what you're watching or listening to or otherwise consuming do you feel like has to be something that can help you with the work you're doing versus something
mhm.
that you just want to study because you want to, grow as an artist or something that you really want to do just for light and for fun?
I have this notes page in my notes app called Acting Notes.
Yeah.
And I get so inspired when I'm watching, right now I'm watching From on
Oh,
like Amazon
yeah.
Plus or whatever. And I started watching that after the show, but actors, even when we are working on a show, we're constantly auditioning also. And so I have these notes to like help me with my tapes, and just things to remember. So whenever I'm watching a show, and like something happens, like in From, it's like hyper realism
Right.
and the body language and everything is like super realistic. And so like I would write that down, like, okay, remember to like not be stiff, to be, like present in your body, and to like, you can lean on something, you can bite your nails, you can mess with your hair, like just do things that people do in life. It's so funny when we're actually shooting, I just watch adult animation. Like I like
Okay, that's
it's
good because it's
so
different.
yeah, it's so hard for me when I'm in front of a camera shooting every day to then go watch something that's live action, because it's in my brain. I'm just like, oh, it's that's a wide, that's a two shot, that's a zoom,
Mm.
like like it's just like it just except for reality TV, actually. I was watching like Bad Girls Club.
Oh, yeah.
I was
I watch a
watching
lot of
some
reality TV.
yeah. So reality TV, I think when I'm shooting is better because you're not thinking like that way. So I was watching some Bad Girls Club from like 2008, so it was like very inspirational like for the show. But
Mhm.
a lot of like Family Guy, a lot of American Dad, stuff like that like when I'm shooting. Yeah, just cuz like I'm just so deep in it that I'm just like I just can't like think about like that, right now when I'm trying to
Yeah.
relax.
Well, because hearing you talk about taking the notes the way you take them, it feels like almost anything you're watching is for work. Like, I
Mhm.
mean, I was a journalist for a million years, and literally, somebody asked me once, can you ever just watch something for fun? And I said no, because even when you watch an old show, your brain is like, oh, what anniversary story can I get out of this? What listicle or gallery can I get? Like, you're just tapped
Right.
in a certain way.
Yeah.
So,
I always describe it because people ask me that all the time. Like, oh, as an actor, like, do you like TV? And I think that for I think that for me, the stuff that's good, I appreciate it even more. And I'm still a TV junkie. Like I still love watching TV. Like I'm obsessed with From right now. And I really enjoy it because it's so good. But then when I watch something that's bad, it's like really bad, And it's made my, TV and movie consumption just like extreme.
right. Well, what the part of the reason I'm asking is because we're talking a lot about TV, obviously, because you're on TV, but also Pearl was an influence
Mhm.
as well, right?
Yeah.
Like I got correct information.
Yes.
Okay. Because one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about that movie, as I assume not an inspiration for the work you're doing on Tell Me Lies, just in general. Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me what it was like. Is it the genre? Are you like a horror fan, or was it
Mhm.
is performance? Like, what was the thing that you feel like captured you the most about this movie? And was it the first of the trilogy you saw, or did you actually watch them in the order that they were released in?
It's interesting because Pearl, and I looked this up because I was like, what? Because I knew I had known about these movies and it had been on my watch list for a really long time. And I looked it up and I think that Pearl and X were like released
Mm.
not simultaneously, but like very closely in the same time. But I watched Pearl first. One of my a guy that I went to school with who's a couple years above me, David Cornsweet, he's in
Oh,
it.
yeah, yeah,
He's
yeah.
like, yeah. So that's also like that's also something I really, really enjoy is watching my classmates work. It's like awesome. So that was really fun watching him. But I love horror. I love thriller. I not so much like Pearl's very gory. I'm not like so much into that, but and it's kind of like I also love absurdity.
Mhm.
It's kind of like an absurd horror, and I just admire and like that's the kind of movie that I want to be in, like an A24 horror film like is that's like my dream role. And I just like I think Mia Goth is so incredibly talented, and the way that she like gets like dives into these characters that are just in a very, I don't know, like strained mental state. I think it's just so interesting. I thought the movie was really fun too, and there's like mystery. And it's like seeing people, like seeing someone like truly at their wits' end and like what
Yeah.
it does to you. But yeah, I enjoyed it so much. I just thought it was like a really cool, like fun movie.
But was that one where you could just turn your brain off and enjoy it? Because like I think about the like effectively the monologue she gives when she's confessing
Mhm.
everything. And to me, I'm like, if I were an actor, I feel like I would be taking notes, like what she did that I liked,
Oh,
what she did that I would do differently, like that. As for everything that you're talking about in terms of the horror and the absurdity, like that is such a grounded moment, but it is also a moment that I, I mean, I am not an actor, so I could never do it, but I feel like the movie lives or dies in that moment because if you don't believe her at any point when the camera's just on her face the entire time, you lose the
mhm.
audience, even if you had them for the first hour and a half.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I saw because that has become such an iconic moment.
Yeah.
I saw a lot of like clips of that before I actually watched the movie, and I was never taken out of it. I was never,
Yeah.
thinking like, oh, like I was never judgmental about it. I was really truly in awe because it's one take. Like there's no cuts, there's no edits,
Exactly.
it's one take, and I just truly like applaud her for it. Like I just think that it's like it's brilliant and so so complex.
Yeah.
And I think that would be a really fun exercise for an actor too to like do that, like perform that monologue. Um so no, yeah, I wasn't like taken out of it, and I've like
Oh, I just meant more taking like notes as an actor, like
yeah,
rather than just enjoying it as a
mhm,
quote unquote normal viewer.
right. Yeah, I think that like technically, because I am an actor, I understood, what she
Yeah.
was doing, like having things build up inside that like begin to like leak, and there's a mask that begins to like break. Um and so yeah, I definitely I had an understanding of what she was doing, and I think that like that paradox, is something that I really took from that. It's that like your internal life, there's always something else happening, like
Mhm.
it's I think it speaks to like how rare it is in life for someone to just be completely raw, like completely like, this is what's going on. Even with your closest friends and family, like there's always things that are going on inside of you that I don't think that you necessarily want to show, but then they do show. And then that's what's really exciting to see is when things slip out.
Right.
Um so yeah, I thought that thought that was incredible.
Yeah. And then also I just like the juxtaposition position at the end when the husband comes back and like she
Right.
puts that smile back on her face and has
Mhm.
to hold it
Mhm.
again for a really long time as the
Yeah.
credits just roll. And I'm like, this,
Yeah.
I almost wish the credits weren't rolling over her face because like I want to see what's in the eye. Like, is she
Mhm.
cracking a little, like not as an actor, but allowing the character to crack a
Right.
like that to me was crazy. Like, yeah, the movie's crazy overall, but to me, that was the crazier part was what
Mhm.
she was asked to do, not the actual
Right.
plot. I mean, but
And
also,
what
matricide is common now in
right.
movies. So
And what's really interesting is that she wrote this. Like,
yeah.
like she like this is it's so funny like when you said like she's was asked to do like she was doing this on her own,
Well, I was gonna say, I mean, she wrote it with Ty, so I was like, I don't know enough to know who wrote what, or to be like, if
Right.
there was any sort of maybe negotiation around like, does it
Right.
really have to be one take?
Mhm.
Because
I
yeah, you're
think
right.
that
Like there, it
yeah.
is different to say I'm gonna choose to do this for myself versus I'm gonna
Right.
take on a challenge somebody else has handed me.
Right. Right.
You mentioned David. When you went to school with him, I mean, you said he was a few years older than you, so,
Mhm.
or above you in class. So
Mhm.
when you then watch his work, are there, do you like feel like you see did you feel like you saw those reflections of like what the stuff he would do when you guys were in school together? Do you see an evolution? And is that something you guys talk about as actors?
I think for me, like I don't know if I necessarily analyze it in that way. It's just it's fun. Like he's not he's playing, I think, a character that is not like too far outside of who he just is as a person, which is just like a nice, like normal guy, you know. So it was just fun. Like I was like, oh, that's that's one of my classmates. That's someone I know, and it's and it is funny because, and I was also watching this like other movie that one of my like very like close friends was in, and it's hard to like that the separation of like seeing them like, oh, that's not David, that's
Right.
like a character, so that's always a little bit like more difficult for me, is like separating that, because I just like see my friend, and I'm so proud of them, and I'm like, oh, like look at what he's doing now, and kind of like there's like less of definitely less like subjective,
Sure.
view of it. But I love it. I really enjoy it. That's like one of my favorite things, is to like watch things that like my classmates are doing. And yeah, just like I'm so like proud of them. And like yeah, seeing things like, oh, like like certain mannerisms, and like
Mm.
because like no matter what, unless you're like in full prosthetics and like you can't even tell like who you are, like everyone has certain body languages and like ways of speaking that like make them unique, that they bring to every character that they do. So it's fun seeing that too, and seeing like, oh, like it just like it makes me feel like nostalgic and
Mm.
like familiar,
You mentioned a second ago that like A24 horror is something you want to
Mhm.
do. What end of that? Do you want to be the final girl? Do you want to be the killer? Do you want to be a victim? Like, what do you think is the more fun, either challenge or not even challenge, just the more fun role?
I think the killer, I think the person who's like, who we would say is like crazy, I think that is so fun. Like to be a Pearl,
Well, that's what I
like,
was gonna say, because
yeah,
like I think it also depends on the type of role, right? Because like
right.
Pearl, I mean, Pearl has some unraveling, but I would also argue that like Pearl's circumstance causes her to unravel. So how
Mhm.
much of it is, you get to play with your surroundings, you get to play with
Right.
the character's own mental instability,
Mhm.
etc.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that like being someone who like you see break, or like you see someone like crack, I think that like that's something that is like incredibly compelling to me as an actor and as an audience member, and like having the challenge of that. I think it's just so fun, and something that like I haven't really been able to do yet. I think that, Diana has her own unraveling, but and like obviously to like a less extreme, it's a different
Right.
genre.
So far.
It's just yeah, it's just like it's a different thing. But yeah, definitely the killer, definitely the like person who's like losing it, that would be so cool.
When you look at Pearl as an example, what was the moment where you felt like that's the piece, that's the thing that you think would be the most fun to play?
I think her like the like her having sex with the scarecrow,
That is
like
not what
I
I thought you were gonna say, but okay.
that I mean, maybe that's just something that like really stuck out to me, and
But yeah,
something that's just so bizarre, but also speaks to how like deeply lonely she is, and how starved she is for like any kind of human connection. And I think that that's like very, very relatable to a lot of people, even though like she's like fucking the scarecrow, they're like, how is that relatable? But like, no, it's like this woman who misses her husband, Um, so yeah, that's when I was like, oh, okay, yeah, this is going in a good direction,
I honestly thought you might say when she kills David's character. Because there was
Yeah.
that, for me, there was that moment where she's screaming at him about like, you're not going to leave me here, but then she
Mhm.
kills him. Like, well, if you
Right.
wanted to go with him, who's going to take you now? Like, you
Right.
have to go on your own. Are you able to go on your
Mhm.
own now? I don't think that you are. And so
Right.
to
Yeah.
me, that was that little like, oh, mentally she's broken. And
Yeah.
I don't know that that's the first time it exhibited it in the movie, but that was the first time that like I really
Mm.
stuck, like it stuck with me more. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. I
I
think
guess
that
it's unfair to say you want to kill David because you know,
right.
but
Right.
whatever.
Yeah. No, I think that that's when it fully, like, for me, I think that like her behavior had shown itself that like, oh, this girl is not like, she's not stable.
Right.
But yeah, that was, I think it's interesting because like there are different, like that's the point of no return in the movie. You know, once she makes that decision, it's like, okay, like
Mhm.
this is where we're going. Um, but yeah, that's a really interesting moment too. Really sad. I was like, no, David, don't die, you know.
I mean, I kind of figured though, I would, so I hadn't seen X, and I honestly still
Mhm.
haven't seen X. But when I went into the movie, I kind of assumed like, okay, looking at I'm the person that still looks at who's in this, and then going
Mhm.
based on like, okay, who's a big name that's in this, and how
Right.
many characters are there? I was like, I'm assuming nobody's making it out alive but her. So I was actually kind of pleasantly surprised that she let more people live than I was
Mhm.
expecting.
Yeah, yeah.
So just like to circle all the way around to all of these things that we've talked about in terms of influences, I asked you at the start how much like Amy's music specifically might influence or might be like a thing you use to get into character. But as I'm hearing
Mm,
you talk about like all of these other things, taking acting notes from other projects that you like, or just doing this deep character work in terms of like Diana's off-screen life, like what
mm,
do you feel is the thing that prepares you the best, not for the old character overall, but to like step on set
mm,
on any
yeah.
given day?
I think for me, it's always the moment before, which when you're working on a new scene, that's rarely something that we just saw, you know, unless like you're in every single scene. So it's like, loading up on those emotional circumstances, like where am I coming from? What is the conversation that I just had before? Like what's going on in my life to lead me up to this moment? What is she thinking? Like what's going on, you know? Um, so yeah, and like for sometimes like we did just see her, 5 minutes ago. And then for other times it's like, oh, it's been 3 weeks. So yeah, I think that like coming in, like saying, okay, like where, like if I'm stepping into a room, what's the room that I was in before and what was I doing there, you know?
You said where she's coming from and right before. So we just saw that. We just saw the end of season 2 of Tell Me Lies. Where do you want to see her go? Like, let's just best case scenario this. You get the season 3. I know
Hmm.
it's not how it really works where you can like dictate where she goes.
Right.
Relax, everyone who's listening. We all know that. But like, if you
Yeah.
had your choice of what we get to explore with her, maybe because of something you want to perform or just like a
Mhm.
story you think is interesting, what is your dream scenario for season 3?
Oh, I think that like reconciling in the 2008 stuff, I think like reconciling with Pippa, because like where we leave them off is like a really shaky spot, and also her coming to Pippa, because Pippa is extremely rightfully judgmental and like confused about like Diana and Steven's relationship. And so I think like coming to Pippa saying like it's over, I'm done with him, like you were right, like he is a bad person and I knew that all along, but I just couldn't tell you because like of all the shit that's going on. So like clearing the air there. And I think that like see, like having like some distance from like that whole situation, but it also like my just like the messy side of me. It's like I want Steven to find out. I want him to find out that, that I like totally lied and like all this stuff. But then at the same time, like what is like how is he gonna retaliate
Right.
to
I was just
me?
thinking that because of what happens
Yeah,
in season 2, like he is so calculated. Like he literally
right.
not today and then cut to years later on the most
Right.
important day of your life.
Yeah.
Bam. So like
I know.
I don't know.
So that would be
Also, I don't know. You said he was the most intelligent person she knows. You gave him a lot of credit. I don't know if he's smart enough to figure it out on his own, or if
but
someone
like,
can
okay,
happen to him.
yeah, that's my thing is that like we come, like he's gonna find out. Like we have a whole semester left. Like maybe if the season ended at summer break when like I could like possibly never see him again, but like we have a whole semester left. Like he's gonna, like in my mind, he's gonna find out, and then like what's he gonna do about it? You know, like how is he gonna like get her back from like basically making like a complete fool of him, you know? So that would be really interesting to me. Not it would not be so fun for Diana, but I think it would be interesting to like do and to watch, you
Right, I
know.
was gonna say it's fun for all of us, not
Right,
the
exactly.
characters. So
Yeah.
I made a joke earlier where I said I play a game of like one to sociopath, or well, sorry,
Mhm.
we're one to Steven,
Right.
sociopath. How bad of a person do you think Steven is?
I think he's I think he's a very bad person, but I think he also doesn't even have the capability. I don't think he is necessarily like even physically or mentally capable of
Mm,
empathy in the same way that your average person is. I think that's a piece of him that's just missing and like kind of broken. And like, how much is that his fault? Like, how much was he just born like that? You know, how much does like his you know trauma with his mom and his family, like how much is that, you know? And it doesn't
yeah.
excuse the horrible things that he did, but it's like, you know, I think that's just kind of like who he is. And I think that he comes to terms with that also, you know? He's like, "Yeah, this is me, you know? I'm a bad person, and that's just, like, how I am, and, like, I don't feel sorry or bad."
It's great that he found the self-awareness, but like, are you gonna do anything about it? Are you gonna try to
Right,
or like,
exactly.
and do you feel like before I let you go, do you feel like Diana would agree with your assessment of him?
I think she would. I think that after she finds those pictures, like,
Mm,
she can't be in denial anymore. Like, it becomes so glaringly obvious that, like, this is not just, like, a bad person, but, like, a dangerous person, you know, who will hurt people.
right, right.
Yeah.
I don't know. We still found a lot of empathy for him in some ways. So thank you for that.
Right.
I mean, maybe
Yeah.
that'll have us all rewatching season
Yeah.
2 in a different light. And thank you for
Yeah.
coming on today, of course.
Yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed our conversation. It was so much fun.
Thanks. Don't switch apps just yet. I always like to leave you with where you can find the things discussed on the podcast. And so on today's episode of Made Possible by Pop Culture, we discussed Amy Winehouse as Alicia's past influence. Amy's music can be found pretty much wherever music is available. Sure, you can go to a local shop in your neighborhood if you still have one, but there's always Amazon Music, Apple Music, Spotify, etc. Then there's Pearl, the movie, that's available on Netflix. Alicia also surprised us with a little mention of From on MGM Plus. If you haven't seen it, that is actually a personal favorite of mine. I'm glad she brought it up. I'm kind of bummed we didn't get to talk about it more, but MGM Plus. She also quickly referenced Bad Girls Club, which you can find on Hulu. And then, of course, her show, Tell Me Lies, available on Hulu, seasons 1 and 2, streaming in full now. As always, none of these streamers or these places are paying me or sponsoring me in any way to list them or to tell you to go there specifically. I'm just doing it for ease for you. So enjoy. I hope that you find something new you love or something old that you can rewatch and remember your love for. And I will see you and you will hear me back here next week for a new episode of Made Possible by Pop Culture, the podcast.